one of the folks who came to the first service and had been at the union service last week, which was this big celebrity thing. And this fellow said to me, "So how are you going to top last week's sermon?" And I said, "Well, you have to understand how it is for me. Every 6 weeks, I want to hit a home run at least once. I allow myself to strike out at least once. The rest of the time, I want to get on base, and I got Norman in the choir to hit me in." That's the way it goes. Herod, the tetrarch of Galilee, silences John the Baptist at the beginning of our text today by throwing him in prison. It is this act of jailing Jesus' shirt-tail cousin, the one that baptized him, the crazy prophet who was at the Jordan River. It was the act of throwing him into prison that ignites Jesus' ministry. And he moves from Nazareth to Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali. And Matthew says this is to fulfill what the prophet Isaiah said, and quote, "Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles." Okay, I hear those words tumbling by and I go, what the heck is going on here? Zebulun, Naphtali, Galilee of the Gentiles. Well, Isaiah is referring to a time when the Assyrian Empire had taken over Israel and exiled all of the people. So here were Assyrians who were in this area. It was under their rule, under the rule of Gentiles, Galilee of the Gentiles. This is the land that was given to the people of Israel. And Zebulun and Naphtali are actually names of sons of Jacob, who create the 12 tribes of Israel. And around Galilee, the tribes of these two sons were able to be. But in that period, when Syria had run them over, it was Galilee of the Gentiles. And then Isaiah said, "The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light." And what he is referring to is that God leads them all back home. They end up back in Israel after they've been taken to exile. This is not lost on Matthew's audience. For now, these areas are Galilee of the Gentiles again. So in 63 BCE, you're going to get a little history lesson here, whether you like it or not. In 63 BCE, Pompey is the general of the Roman army, is out on the outskirts of the Roman Empire where barely anybody pays any attention to anything because who gives a rip? And he is taking care actually of some piracy in the Black Sea, and he is told that there is a civil war going on in Israel. There are two chief priests, actually brothers, who are warring with each other for leadership. And in the Roman Empire, you can't have disorder. It's all about order. And so Pompey comes down, sides with one of them, defeats the other, and makes Israel directly under Gentile rule again. He makes taxes, he takes money from the treasury, and he occupies them with a military force. So this happens about 80 years before Jesus starts his ministry, okay? And in those 80 years, there are several self-appointed messiahs who step up and are going to throw Rome off their backs. They're going to get rid of the empire. Every one of them fails. and the leaders are executed, and so are their followers. So when Jesus hears that John the Baptist has been thrown into prison, he knows that he's got to move. He knows that his time may be short. He might get thrown into prison or worse, as we all know happens. So he begins his ministry in that context. The first thing he does is he says, repent, for the empire of heaven is at hand. Now we hear the word kingdom there, but I want to use the word empire today. The Greek word basileia can be translated kingdom, reign, or empire. I don't know about you, but for me, when I hear of kingdoms, I always hear of this happily ever after kind of thing, you know. But empire has different implications about it. There are colonials, peoples who are being colonized under an empire, and that is what is happening in Israel. So repent, turn from the empire of Rome to the empire of heaven. It involves turning. Now, some could easily think at this point that Jesus is like those other messiahs. He has done what a lot of colonials do, you know, take the language of the empire, the Roman Empire, and turn it around for your own use. You know how we were called Yankees by the British as a pejorative term during the Revolutionary War? And then, I don't know who had the idea, but somebody said, who gives a rip if they call us Yankees? If they call us Yankees, Yankees we are. So they take the empire's language, turn it on its head, give it a new meaning. We're proud to be Yankees. Unless we're Red Sox fans, of course. And here's what Jesus is doing with the language of the empire. The Roman Empire rules all. Repent. Turn to the empire of heaven. It could sound like he is trying to muster up some folks, give them some weapons, and take over the Roman Empire, at least get them off their backs. But he doesn't set out to do that. What he does is he calls two sets of brothers to follow him. They're fishermen, embedded in the empire's economy, paying taxes like everyone else. They're in need of work, but when they are called by Jesus to drop their nets, to leave their boats and follow him, they do. They're in need of family, but James and John walk away from their father Zebedee when Jesus calls. And Zebedee's presence is repeated 3 times in 2 verses. Why? Why this dramatic step on the brothers' part? Well, it may have to do with the unusual way in which Jesus called his disciples. See, usually rabbis didn't choose students. Students chose rabbis. Rabbis taught the law. And if you heard about a particular rabbi that you thought could teach you well, you would go to that rabbi and you would learn the law from them. And then when you got as much out of them as you can, you might turn and go to another rabbi and learn the law from them. So rabbis exist to teach the law. But Jesus doesn't say that. Jesus says, follow me. It implies something else altogether. And maybe this is why they got up. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of people. Not, I will teach you the ways of the Torah, which of course he does through his own interpretation. Maybe that is what inspires them, this kind of face-to-face learning that they might have. I don't know, maybe there were other folks down the beach who Jesus called to and said, hey, Steve, follow me. But, you know, it didn't click for Steve, and so he says, you're a new guy to Capernaum anyway. I don't know. We don't know exactly why is that they got up and followed, but they did. The empire of heaven has something to do with fishing for people. The empire of Rome rides roughshod over people for profit and efficiency's sake. The empire of family in ancient Israel was the highest loyalty, a good old boys club that excluded all others. The empire of work throughout the ages threatens to be all-consuming so that people could be reduced to a function of economic cycles, which, by the way, is the reason God created the Sabbath. These things can no longer be the center posts of life, Jesus is saying. Follow me and learn how to fish for people, and so enter the empire of heaven. But of course they don't get it. You know how it goes with the disciples. James and John want the right and left-hand sides of Jesus' throne when he comes into power. The disciples argue among themselves as to who is the greatest among them. And in the end, they desert Jesus when the Roman powers come to execute him. Maybe they followed him originally thinking he was going to create an army and overthrow Rome, but he didn't. The last verse in our text tells us what he did. It says, Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the empire of God and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. Here we see the empire of God at work. Healing, reconciliation, caring for the sick. Some ask, why are there so many sick people in the Gospels? They seem to be all over the place. They come by the hundreds and the thousands, and Jesus heals them, What's up with that? I'm going to quote to you. It's a rather long quote from Dr. Warren Carter. He says, the Gospels reflect the imperial world at that historical point. Roman imperial structures and practices were bad for people's health. Some 70 to 90% of folks in Rome's empire experienced varying degrees of poverty, from the very poorest to those who temporarily fell below subsistence levels. Understandings of hygiene were limited. Water quality was poor. Food insecurity was rife with low quality and limited quantities. Such factors resulted in widespread diseases associated with poor nutrition, blindness, muscle weakness, etc., and a lack of immunity, cholera, diarrhea, etc. Beside the kind of psychical insecurity one feels in living in a military-occupied country, which comes, of course, from the prospect of rape, extortion, beatings, murders, all common events in occupied countries. Some people begin to feel possessed, occupied by a demon, because the culture itself is occupied by a demon. These kinds of diseases were death-bringing in a world that required physical labor for survival. So you get what's up? Jesus' healings are acts that repair the damage of the empire that it has done, and Jesus' healings enact God's life-giving empire in restoring people's lives. You see, Jesus had a strategy. And it was not to get up a band of marauders and attack the Roman army. Jesus' strategy was to infect the efficient, profit-bound, power-mongering machine known as the Roman Empire with a virus. Into the brutality of the Roman Empire's computer, the virus of compassion takes place and begins to break down the empire. Okay, that's incredible. What's incredible is the story that follows. And you know some of it because, of course, Jesus himself begins to spread this virus of compassion. And the crowds grow so big that he's got to be crucified because they're afraid that he might gain great power. And then when he is gone, the Peter, James, John, Andrew, all the disciples, they get together in a community and they decide that they are going to care for the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the poor, the sick, the ill. And that community begins to grow like crazy. And then the Apostle Paul comes along and he takes this virus out into the Roman Empire. And these little communities start with this virus of compassion everywhere that it's planted. Okay, another little history lesson here. In the 4th century, the Emperor Julian launched a campaign to institute pagan charities in an effort to match the Christians. What? Julian complained in a letter to the high priest of Galatia in 362 that the pagans needed to equal the virtues of Christians, for recent Christian growth was caused by, quote, their moral character, even if they pretended, and by their benevolence towards strangers and care for the graves of the dead. You see, mercy was regarded in pagan society as a character defect because it involves providing unearned help or relief. It was deemed contrary to justice and therefore irrational. Okay, let me be a little bit heretical. Say, that reminds me a little bit of the Protestant work ethic. Maybe it's a human thing. Okay, where was I? In a letter to another priest, Julian wrote, I think that when the poor happened to be neglected and overlooked by the pagan priests, the impious Galileans observed this and devoted themselves to benevolence. And he also wrote, the impious Galileans support not only their poor, but ours as well. Everyone can see that our people lack aid from us. I mean, this is the emperor of the Roman Empire basically asking the Christian church to stop it. You're making us look bad. He even suspected that their benevolence had ulterior motives. But when the pagan societies tried it, the struggle was that it didn't actually come from love. It didn't actually come from compassion. So by Julian's day in the 4th century, it was too late to overtake this colossal result. The virus of compassion had infected the Roman Empire in such a way that it was impossible to do away with it. It was infected with such teachings as, I am my brothers and sisters' keeper. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Okay, that blows me away. And what about us? What about you? What about me? Well, we've come a long way since Rome. Pompey, the one who flattened Israel, he was assassinated just a few years after he had put Israel under Roman charge. He was assassinated by a rival so that he would not become emperor. We've come a long way. We've just had a peaceful transition of power at the highest level. I got to tell you, that is real progress. I mean, there may be no two leaders in recent history who have such different points of view as Obama and Trump. And yet, the transfer of that power was peaceful. And we wish Obama well in his new life that he takes on, and our goodwill and prayers for President Trump as he carries us into the future. So this is progress, but let's not be blind to the ways in which our culture can crush people. The pace of life exhausts many. The pressure of competition can drive workers in ways that bend the psyche and call for alcohol and drugs to numb the mind. The gap between the dirt poor and the filthy rich is wider than it has ever been. A lack of jobs in our urban centers and rural outposts drive people to depression, drugs, and crime. I say to you that the empire of God, the empire of heaven, is as needed today as it ever was. You know people who are hurting. You know people who seek compassion. You know people who simply need someone to listen to them. You know people who are rejected for one reason or another. And Jesus is walking by you and walking by me at your place of work, me standing in my pulpit, you in your office, and saying, follow me. Come, help me plant the virus of compassion in this world until all is taken over, until that great vision that Isaiah has for humankind, in which all people enjoy abundant good food, in which there is physical, emotional, and mental wholeness, where the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. Go be the virus of compassion.